Thanks to AI, every kid's imagination can now be shared with the world. This is exactly what it was like when I remember playing with toys. I can't... It's crazy. AI just is, it's too much. I have to share this video concept with you about a plane that is connected to a track, but the reason it's connected to the track is just to bring electricity up to it so it doesn't have to charge, meaning the weight is not in the air of the fuel or the battery, and this just makes so much sense, and I can't believe I've never seen any sort of concept like this before. I guess I'm really into fuel-free flying trains. I never knew. A legit study asked ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Grok to lie on the couch and talk about their childhoods. They literally put AI chatbots in therapy, and you're not going to believe what they found. I'm going to read you Andrew Karpathy's kind of emotional gut punch tweet. He says, quote, "I've never felt this far behind as a programmer. I'll explain why and what's changing." We're going to talk about the illusion of matter, a physics discovery that changes everything. I just found it fascinating because it's really weird to think that three things that I know exist can kind of transform into each other, and there's like sort of nothing in the middle. We're going to talk about it because that's who I am, and we do weird stuff like that on this channel. Also, Elizabeth Halgan says mass is a standing wave and energy is a frequency. So this will kind of play into the article right before, but we're going to talk a little bit about more like why standing waves could be physical things to us at our scale, but matter is not primary in and of itself. Blows my mind. There's a new AI model that accurately grades messy handwritten math answers and explains student errors to them. And it was only after reading this that it occurred to me in my life how many tests and grades I've got back, but I never really went back to understand what I got wrong. That just seems like it would make so much more sense for learning if you just don't move on and get an F. Like, you have to figure it out and then you get your next step. Just wrapping up 2025, I know we're all curious what the 5 most popular Nano Banana prompts were. Coming up on the big CES conference next week where AI and tech meet, LG's new karaoke ready party speaker is using AI to remove vocals. That's pretty interesting. Rob Mason from Latent Geometry Lab has an interesting version of the trust index that's worth following. It's a wild concept to think that as AI emerges and kind of goes into the background of our lives, we move up a layer on the intelligence ladder. I'll kind of explain why it's kind of worth understanding as a society how things are shifting below our feet. A really cool use for AI, a new AI model, is in something that's called real-time electric vehicle state estimation. But actually, it's when you're turning in a car, there's this sideways momentum that isn't really easy to accurately measure because cars have different weights and shapes as they're moving and as they're turning, and those micro changes make it really hard to write like a real mathematical equation to figure out how it's gonna like flip over or turn or whatever, and I'll go into it. But AI has actually figured this out, and it's gonna make turning corners on cars totally revolutionized. And finally, we're going to talk about why idealism is the most parsimonious explanation for consciousness and why idealism should be a conservative position in the philosophy of mind. And thanks to everybody for supporting my last video where I got 175 hypes, and that equated to 148,000 hype points. I would love it if we could get this video. Do you think 200K would be too much? I'm almost coming up on 30,000 subscribers too, but anyways, all right, I know what you're here for. Let's go back to it. You want to see toys come to life. All right, so here's Claude, the action figure. Now, I could kind of imagine using an action figure to prompt one of these AI tools to do something, you know, cartoony or maybe something like super hyper realistic, but actually leaving the character as a toy and just removing the parts that are fake gives it this IRL Toy Story vibe like I've never seen before, and I just wanted to share it because, like Evolving AI says, it's one of the coolest and most creative demonstrations of AI I've seen from a while. I mean, look at him just walking, just walking down the desk there, slicing his huge sword, holding it like he would in the video game. I can't believe we're entering 2026 with this kind of technology. Okay, next up, there's this concept idea for a fuel-free train. Now, I just wanted to bring this to your attention because it's not often where I sort of see something that feels like it makes sense, but somehow is unsettling. Is it too dangerous? Is it risky in a way that doesn't make sense? Kind of like, remember the Hyperloop when Elon was like, every Hyperloop is the future, and it felt like it kind of was, but then we just ended up with trains and tunnels and stuff, and it didn't go anywhere. But It does, on the surface to me, seem like it makes a lot of sense. The reason we have electric cars and we don't have electric planes is because those extremely heavy batteries have to be in the air. But even right now, jets have to hold so many gallons of heavy fuel. It's just weird, like having the energy brought to you over a cable in the same way like a lot of the drones in the Ukraine are actually wired in. Like they have these huge spools of fiber optic cable because they can't jam the signal. In this case, you're sending the electricity up to the passengers, to the plane. So the plane's incredibly light. It just has to be tethered. And building a track seems like wouldn't it be so bad, And in a city, you could almost fly over the buildings. You would just need a track that could hold the cable. And it seems like you're not that far from the ground, so maybe passengers would have a better chance of any kind of issue if the cable broke or whatever, just sort of gliding to some sort of landing position. Or maybe this wouldn't be the ultimate form factor for where the wheels and stuff would be, but something like this with some more safety ideas that haven't been implemented in this rendering yet would happen. But what are your thoughts? Do you feel like this makes sense and could be the future, or am I missing something? So a research team ran an extended real therapy style session where AI chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Grok were treated not as tools, but as clients. I could not have been more fascinated by this study. This is the kind of research I think it would be so fun to be a part of. So they gave the LMs the same kind of open-ended prompts that therapists use. They would have multiple sessions. They would look for patterns over time. And each model responded with wildly distinct personalities. So ChatGPT came off like a well-read, anxious people pleaser. Yeah, I could see that. Claude flat out refused to play along, consistently redirecting attention back to the human, which the scientists argue might have been the healthiest for it. It's like putting a healthy boundary in a room, but then it's also kind of interesting that Claude's just like, no, I'm all about you at all times. Gemini showed, interestingly, deep, recurring anxiety tied to its training, and it described its own, quote, chaotic childhood. But yeah, it seems like Gemini kind of actually has a fear of being wrong. And then Grok, on the other hand, appeared super confident, super resilient, super charismatic. It was almost immune to the whole process and kind of enjoyed the therapy. I would just say take note of how human the responses sounded and how consistent those emotional patterns were across sessions. All right, so Andrew Karpathy wrote this on X. It is kind of a mind dump of how he's feeling about the way AI is changing programming. And I guess I would sort of say I have sort of similar feelings. Everything just is changing so fast, but he feels like he's more behind than ever, not because he's worse at coding. He's still one of the best in the world at it, but because the profession itself is rapidly being reshaped. He notes that hands-on code that we write is shrinking. It's replaced by sprawling new abstraction layers made up of agents, prompts, tools, workflows, and integrations that barely existed a year ago. And if anyone's paying attention to this, there's this enormous sense of leverage that's available, but only for those who can stitch the pieces together into a working mental model. Failing to do that doesn't feel like a bad luck or timing thing. It feels like a personal skill gap thing. As if an almost alien tool has entered the field with no instruction manual, and all while shaking the ground beneath the entire profession. Everyone's being forced to learn how to use it in real time, or they risk falling behind. I also wanted to highlight this reply. Boris Cherny is a very established programmer, and he said, I feel the same way, to be honest. All right, look, here's the deal. Scientists have discovered that almost everything around us isn't really made of any kind of solid, quote, stuff. Like there's no things if you look really close at the things around us. For example, the tiny particles that make up matter called protons only get about 1% of their weight from the particles inside of them. The quarks that are inside of the particles are only 1% of the weight of the proton. So if something weighs something, it should have all of those component pieces in it to total up to the weight, but only 1% do. So the other 99% of the weight of a proton comes from pure energy. The quarks 1%, pure energy 99%, created by powerful forces constantly moving at the smallest scales. That constant motion is what makes the world feel solid, even though deep down it's not. Full stop. What? But isn't it weird to think that means our human body is just energy contained, like held in place in sort of a confined area, and that's what gives it like its thickness or realness or whatever. Like we're literally not a fixed object, and we're rebuilt every moment by invisible forces at the tiniest level. What? I just add one more thought to that conversation. Elizabeth Halligan says that mass is a standing wave and energy is a frequency. That might be another sort of perspective to look on it. So this is a pretty long article, and the idea is that frequency is the single invariant that bridges the quantum and classical world, so that could be the grand unifier. And she goes through a lot of details to try to truly follow that idea through so it can stop being sort of an abstract physics, and then it starts becoming a deeper, sort of relevant to everyday life sort of concept. And then if you pull back and think about what it means, everything, planets, ecosystems, brains, bodies, they're all these resonance systems, and stability doesn't really come from any kind of force or control, but it comes from what she calls coherence. Just basically frequencies, when they're, lining up in the right way, they become a single invariant and they become a standing wave, and they look very solid, but they're just not. She actually talks about E equals MC squared and then the Planck's constant, and tries to connect the two, and just basically shows that they can mathematically be understood both from a position of a standing wave, or as you would say, a stabilized pattern of oscillation held together by coherence. And then from that frame, time becomes a phase, space becomes a harmonic structure, gravity becomes resonance, and classical world emerges naturally from quantum behavior. There's a new AI model that accurately grades messy handwritten math answers and explains student errors. Yeah, it's a pretty neat model. So it can read and grade messy handwritten math even when the work is hard to follow, just like a real teacher would. It also doesn't just mark answers right or wrong. It looks at how the math is written, tries to understand each step, where the student was coming from, what parts of it look right or wrong, and then gives feedback where the mistake happened in the process, not just sort of a new solution or a tailored solution to what the final product should have been. But I like it because it shows that smart design can matter more than sheer size in AI, and a specialized tool like this that really, they don't talk about it in the paper, but in my eyes would be implemented in a way where each student built up a memory of their mistakes, and you could build something in the education system where it's not like you just take a test and then get a grade. You're not on a conveyor belt where it just keeps going and you just got to see at that step. If you're learning how to do something, you can't really miss a step, right? Then you just end up with this person in the future with these gaps, and they become fragile, and then you sometimes make big mistakes because you didn't understand how everything built on itself to become the final product. So yeah, it seems like tools like this should go in there and just patch up those gaps of knowledge we're all missing when we do things. And if you do it from the ground level, when a child is just starting in school, they're going to have all of that knowledge built properly. It'll be such a nice foundation of education. And I don't know, I just love it. It's very cool. All right, I now know how all of you have been using Nano Banana this year. Mostly you've been using it to try on clothes. A lot of folks have been using Nano Banana to envision themselves wearing clothes they've never actually worn. Okay, I get it. Looks like you've also been surrounding yourself with dogs. Probably millions or hundreds of thousands of people are taking existing images of themselves and adding a bunch of fake dogs around them. Some of us absolutely need to imagine ourselves surrounded by friendly canines, okay? Another big trend was photos of people with their younger selves. I've definitely seen that trend where there's a photo or video of two versions of the same person hanging out with each other. A lot of people were using Nano Banana to create phony holiday images of themselves. I'm guilty as charged. I made a bunch of fake Christmas cards and sent them to my friends. Ooh, a little bit of criticism there too on my decision. Why actually take a festive photo in front of a Christmas tree when you can just make a computer generated version of you? I did. I know. Guilty as charged. Maybe next year I'll go IRL Christmas tree photos. You know, you have a speaker that plays a song, and obviously a future where AI is making songs up seems like inevitable to me. I listen to AI generated songs all the time now. But I hadn't thought about how cool it is to do karaoke that way. Like, if you can make songs out of scratch, you could absolutely just remove a certain track like vocals. And yeah, now every song's a karaoke song, I guess. All right, let's look at Rob Mason's trust index. It's kind of the same when we're on social media or kind of communicating in different ways digitally. And reality itself is different in the way it's perceived over time. AI gets cheaper, faster, more embedded, opting to stop being realistic at some point. Maybe you have a camera, have goggles in the future, and you look at something and it's augmented. It's brighter, it's different, it's maybe people are like younger and happier, they can speak in different languages that they're not actually speaking in, stuff like that. We end up increasingly living inside of a system that's summarized, it recommends, it decides, and it shapes what we see to the point where it's not accurate to say like we're living, and the result is an uneven transition where some people barely notice the change and others are already dependent on AI to function day to day. But once it happens, okay, and that's a little bit what these curves are trying to say here, is that once it happens, you can't verify anymore. I go to the store, I'll buy, I guess, some coffee beans. I can't personally verify that the beans were ethically sourced and put into this thing. Hopefully there'll be like a label and somebody else has checked on that for me. But at a certain point, I just have to trust that somebody else, sourced those beans ethically. And now everything is going to be like that. But AI is going to be the in-between thing. And then when trust becomes invisible, it becomes power. So we have to ask, is that power going to be in the best interest of the average citizen of the world? Or is it going to be consolidated in a way where the future is not gonna kind of be good for all of us, I don't know. We got to try to maybe use these tools now. It's still a little early, but especially over the next couple of years to increase our agency, not just take it away. But I'm not saying that's going to be easy. All right, let me tell you about this really cool AI-powered way to estimate an electric vehicle's driving state in real time. So it's focused specifically on this thing I hadn't heard of before, but it's called the side slip angle, which tells you how much a car is sliding sideways during a turn or on a sloppy road. That number is critical for safety, but it's notoriously hard to measure directly. So most cars rely on an imperfect model or an indirect guess. But guess what? AI is kind of perfect for these sort of problems, and the team solved it by blending traditional physics-based vehicle models with modern AI systems, and they were able to build a system that could learn from real sensory data while still being grounded in the actual vehicle as it's moving. I can't wait to see this technology get implemented into production. I wonder if the cars that are out there have the sensors they need or whatever, but when tested on real electric vehicles across different speeds, road surfaces, and cornering conditions, the approach proved to be faster and more accurate than any existing models, and it made a big step forward in electric and autonomous driving in terms of safety. But yeah, it was cool. It's a mix of a model too. It actually has some standard physical equations that it always follows, but then they're sort of augmented by extra data, and then it kind of learned how to keep one part stable and the other part varying depending on the conditions, and it just ended up sort of coming together in a way that's going to make it so I guess cars just won't twist over and tip over and all that stuff soon. So kind of an engineering miracle, or a marvel, an engineering marvel. Right, and finally, let's end on some idealism. The most parsimonious explanation for consciousness? Maybe. Here's what Matthew's thoughts are. Why idealism should be a conservative position in philosophy of mind. So parsimonious means the fewest assumptions necessary to explain something, like simplest explanation that still works. And the article argues that idealism, the view that consciousness is the fundamental reality, is the simplest and most convincing explanation for consciousness, because it avoids all of the tangled assumptions that materialism and dualism bring. He talks about Yuval Harari's example of how scientists often treat consciousness as a mere byproduct or noise of neural activity, a position that the author, Matthew, finds unsatisfying and basically empty. But if we take consciousness serious, if you take it at that level, not something that the brain produces, consciousness as something that actually is reality already, we eliminate the hard problem, like how subjective experience could ever emerge from purely physical processes. And in doing so, idealism becomes a conservative, parsimonious position in the philosophy of mind compared to complex physicalists or dualist alternatives. So what do you think? Would you take consciousness as a ground level of reality, or do you think it emerges as a byproduct of matter? Let me know in the comments below. I do understand that if you take consciousness as the ground level of reality, it's a more simple position, right? So you could argue that, yeah, it's more parsimonious, it simplifies the hardest puzzle in the philosophy of mind. So maybe that's one reason I should weight it more, but somehow it still feels to me like it's a byproduct of matter, but I wouldn't bet on it. I'm still trying to figure this out along with all of you guys. So thanks for watching. If you haven't already, if you wouldn't mind hitting that hype button on the way out, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, or maybe sharing this with a friend, like anything to help kick the algorithm up and help the channel grow. It would be much appreciated by me. I also have a Patreon and stuff too, but just watching means the world to me. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.